So thank you all for your interest. If you haven't, check our website, atlantaforall.com. You can see the draft of those chapters. You can drop a comment on there. You can read what other people are saying to us. You can look at your neighborhood map and see what you have today and see what we're recommending for the future. And you can also reach out to us. Catherine Hernandez is my co-project manager. She's the one that helped organize all this. Hi, Catherine. We also have a whole bunch of other Plan A ambassadors, those with orange t-shirts. And then we have like neighborhood ambassadors, like Matt over there wearing our Plan A hats. We got some APAB reps here. So thank you all for spreading the word. When I asked people when they checked in, how'd you hear about this? I heard everything from Facebook, website, to even my poll worker mentioned this to me, which is a new one to me. So that's fantastic. Word is getting around. You can provide us with your comments and your thoughts to the end of February. If you're a neighborhood group, an MPU group, if you want to have a small group discussion with us, me and Catherine and our Plan A team, we're open to do that. Try to schedule us for the month of January to give you all enough time to put your final thoughts on paper and send us your final comments in February. We are asking for final comments on the map, the land use map, by the end of January, so we can make sure that that map is all tidied up and for us to get that done and send it to council and everyone else who has to review it between now and the summer. So please, map comments by the end of January, comments on the draft by the end of February. Again, thank you so much. I want to say thank you, Emily at Plywood Place. Emily used to work with us. She's now here at this great organization. Them opening up their doors for us. You know, this is like a 35th meeting. We've built so much relationships and capital with neighbors that I didn't even know existed. And it's just great having spaces like this in this city to meet. So thank you, Plywood Place. Thank you. Everyone, just say thanks. All right, so that's enough about me. Now, before I end, I will close this out, mention our next meetings, which are January 29th and January 30th. But if you took MARTA, we do have MARTA passes to get you home. So find a Plan A ambassador. I'm just curious, how many people did not drive a car to this meeting? Just curious. All right, that's better than I thought. Awesome, how many people carpooled? Okay. All right, so I would take that. I would say majority of people showed up with not being in the car, so that's great. So that's enough about me. I am not a transportation planner, so I left it to our good friends at ATL, John Saxton, particularly to organize this panel, talk about the transportation chapter. So I will hand it off to him. Thank you all.
Hey everybody. So I'm gonna keep this pretty quick because I really want to get to our panel. So if you don't mind coming up, we have a stacked panel for you tonight. You can tell this picture was before I had kids. I was either airbrushed or it was like a really long time ago. Look a lot younger then. So I'm just going to give us a quick intro. My role tonight, we have kind of an open house sandwich, right? I'm told my role is like the tomato. So we did open house at the front and the end, and then in the middle we've got our panel. So we're going to get into just a past, present, and future for the City of Atlanta from a transportation planning perspective, kind of where we've been, where we are currently, and where we're going. Just another quick show of hands, really. Who has been to this area? The Lee and White development, the breweries, the kombucha place before? Yeah. So a lot of people are familiar with this location. It was chosen, I think, by DCP pretty intentionally because there's a lot of energy from both a transportation and a development perspective happening here. You've got Lee and White, obviously, and the breweries and the distillery. You've got Murphy Crossing, you've got the Lee Street Trail, a lot of activity. So I think that was intentional. The conversation that we're wanting to have tonight with our panelists is really about this intersection between transportation and development and how they work together. It's also a good example of what I think is a new development pattern, Nate, if I'm correct about this, a new development pattern that is in the CDP, which is called fermentation-oriented development. Did I get that right? FOD? So we can get off of my picture and we can go to the past, present, and future, and if we're lucky, we'll be visited by transportation ghosts of City of Atlanta past. So next slide, please. So this is really just a quick rundown of the recent past, right? So since 2018, the last time the City of Atlanta did a citywide transportation plan was in 2018. And this is to show a lot of the things that have happened since then, right? So in 2019, the MARTA board passed the sequencing program of the more MARTA projects. That's $2.5 billion for transit expansion in the city of Atlanta to occur over the following 40 years. Also in 2018 and 2019 was when we invited, or we welcomed maybe, a new mode of transportation to our network, which was the shared dockless mobility devices, or scooters. Originally that was 9 device operators, but now we've got that down to 2, and it's much more orderly than it was initially, and it's also something that we're seeing a lot of growth in. In 2024, we've seen 2.5 million trips on those shared dockless devices. So it's a new and growing mode of transportation that is a part of our ecosystem. In 2020 and 2021, it goes without saying, there were a lot of impacts for transportation and all of our lives and industries related to the pandemic. One of those around transportation was we saw changes in commute patterns, ridership and transit falling, but we also saw growth around, resurgence around e-bikes and biking and rollerblading and things like that, more active transportation. It also, in the government response to that, we saw historic levels of funding being provided. So the city of Atlanta has won several federal grants, the Stitch, if you're familiar with that downtown, the Central Prior Safe Street project, as well as the West Side project on Lowry to connect to the West Side Park in Northwest Atlanta. So we've been lucky to receive a good amount of federal funding that is in response to the pandemic. In 2022 and 2023, this is when in May of 22, City of Atlanta residents passed an additional T-SPLOST, or transportation sales tax, to fund transportation projects. That's $460 million, $300 million of which is focused on sidewalks and trails and safe streets improvements. Yeah, that definitely deserves some applause. Great work, City of Atlanta residents, voting for that. And then also last year, we passed our first Vision Zero action plan. And this is our guidebook on, also deserving applause, this is our guidebook for the Department of Transportation about how we get down to 0 traffic fatalities and severe injuries. So that was something that also surged during the pandemic. We saw that number almost double during the pandemic from what it was before. And thankfully, we're seeing that number come back down, but we still have a lot of work to do. Our Vision Zero action plan is our guide to doing that. And then in 2024, we've heard a lot of, there's been a lot of news. The mayor made the announcements about infill stations, one of which is just down the Beltline here in Murphy Crossing. Beltline made the announcement about being 80% complete with the Beltline Trail in 2026, just 24 months from now. And then the Trails Atlanta plan, we launched our first citywide trails plan that Eric and the Path Foundation are working on. If you haven't talked to him, he's here tonight and is looking for your feedback. So that's kind of a quick, recent past, okay? Next slide, if we can go to the present. These are the goals that we've identified in the transportation chapter. This is the work that we're doing today and in the near future. And I'm not gonna talk about each of these. We have a board back there with the lovely DOT folks. DOT folks over there, give us a wave, right? Those folks over there are happy to talk to you about some of the work that we're doing. These are some of the goals, first and foremost, which is safety, which I just touched on. But then also, with all of this funding that has been made available, that comes with project delivery. So that's taking these projects, these funds, and putting them on paper, putting them into design, and then eventually into shovels in the ground. The last piece that I'm going to touch on here for our goals is equity and affordability. And that means not only are we prioritizing projects for the city of Atlanta, transportation projects that fund projects in neighborhoods that have been historically disinvested in, but it also means that we are looking at, in addition to our affordable housing investments, how do we align transportation investments with those projects so that not only do people have an affordable place to live, they have affordable options for how they get around. So this is just a quick survey of kind of where we are now. Welcome any feedback that you've got, comments to put online for the transportation chapter, and any discussion you want to have later tonight. And then where we're going for the future. Next slide. So this is an important time of where we're at right now. We're kind of wrapping up the Comprehensive Development Plan CDP, Plan A exercise. And next year, we're moving into the Comprehensive Transportation Plan. And as I mentioned, this is the first plan really since ATL-DOT was formed, which was another bullet on that graph that we just saw. ATL-DOT is only 4 or 5 years old, right? So this will be the first transportation plan for the city since ATL-DOT was formed as a standalone department. And these are some of the things that we're going to focus on in that plan. These are some of the sub-plans or topics that we're going to be looking at. So now is a great time for you to get engaged. We've got a QR code up there at the top of the page where we want your feedback. Now is a great time for you to tell us, what are your needs? What are your challenges? What are your priorities? What ideas do you have for engagement to make sure that this plan really reflects the needs and desires of City of Atlanta residents? So this is only the first you're going to be hearing about the CTP. But there's a lot more to come, focusing on these topics and some additional topics like how we think about freight and delivery, how we think about the needs of ATL-DOT as a department, and how we need to grow as an organization. So a lot more to come about the CTP. This is just to provide a teaser and differentiate that from where we are now with the CDP or Plan A. Okay? That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to get out of the way and then pass it over to our panel and our moderator. So our moderator for tonight is a woman who many of you already know. She wears many hats. You may know her as the programs director at Propel ATL. You may know her as a MARTA board representative for the City of Atlanta. You may also know her as the board president for the Atlanta Planning Advisory Board. Or, like me, you know her as a Southwest Atlanta and NPUX resident and neighbor, Sagira Jones.
Good evening. I don't know. Okay, so how many of you guys woke up breathing today? Good evening. Yes. All right. So just to do a little framing before we even start and get to our panelists. When we're thinking about what we want out of this CDP, this Comprehensive Development Plan, and the Transportation Chapter, and later on next year, our Comprehensive Transportation Plan, we're not just talking about transportation, moving goods and services and people from point A to point B. We are talking about mobility, how people are getting to places, how they're accessing opportunities, and how they are interacting and having the opportunities to interact with each other. So during this discussion, we're going to keep it really high level because we're thinking about the next 5 years. So if you have a question about an intersection or a specific project, take it to the boards, take it to John, take it to Kevin Ness. But if you have any ideas or feedbacks or suggestion about what we should be doing over the next 5 years, what our decisions look like and how they'll play out in the next 5 to 10 years, then that's where the feedback and comments are most needed. Now, I have a couple of questions for you all. First, how many people here have actually read any part of the Comprehensive Development Plan, Plan A? Wow, y'all are serious, I love it. How many people have read the Transportation Chapter? Okay, so you guys aren't going home with any homework, great job. So how many people have elevated a transportation challenge or issue to a transportation agency or public official? How many of those people that raised their hand for raising an issue, how many of you had your issue addressed? Fewer people, okay. So I asked that just to show the panelists who they're talking with tonight, because this is not just a conversation between them, this is actually a conversation with you all and for you all. And just knowing that sometimes our issues don't get addressed immediately, but we know that transportation plans take longer than a week or so. So just wanted to make sure we center that and are here together. Are we good? All right. All right, so our first panelist is Ms. Amanda Rhymes, Executive Director at the Atlanta Land Trust. a nonprofit committed to creating and stewarding permanently affordable housing to support inclusive, equitable communities throughout the city of Atlanta. Before joining the Atlanta Land Trust, Ms. Ryan led the Transit-Oriented Development Initiative at MARTA, resulting in the development of over 35 acres of underutilized surface parking at 8 heavy rail stations. Ms. Ryan is also an active Urban Land Institute Chair of Mission Advancement, and is a former board member of Dad's Garage. Welcome, Amanda. Then we have next Mr. Joel Dixon. Many people may know him, as John mentioned, as a neighbor, but he is the principal at Urban Oasis Development. And also co-founder. Urban Oasis is a real estate development company focused on residential and commercial projects in town Atlanta. He oversees business development and community development along with investor relations. In addition to Urban Oasis Development's projects, Mr. Dixon has provided real estate and community advisory services to a variety of third-party commercial and residential acquisition projects totaling over $900 million. Prior to launching Urban Oasis, Mr. Dixon has had over 15 years of sales and business experience. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Ms. Carrie Burns, Senior Manager of Multimodal Design and Programs at the National Association of City Transportation Officials. You all may know her as the former Chief Bicycle Officer for the City of Atlanta, where she led the city's bike planning efforts, the shared micromobility programs, and the implementation of the Mayor's Action Plan for Safer Streets, a 2-year plan to triple the size of the city's on-street protected bike network. Welcome, Ms. Byrne. All right, so before we get too much into the CDP, we've seen the research, we've seen the articles, we've seen the memes, we've seen the social media comments, traffic in Atlanta. Give it to us.
Hello? Okay, great. Hey, everybody. Good to be here with you tonight. So the thing that drives me the most crazy about all of the memes about Atlanta is when people say that we're full. Because you guys know, I think there are probably a lot of people that are interested in city planning in the room, housing advocates, transportation advocates. We could be a lot more dense than we are right now. And we know that over the next 30 or so years, the Atlanta population is going to grow by almost 2 million people. So all those people are coming here, whether we want them to or not. They're not concerned about whether we think that there's capacity for them. And so it's incredibly important that we are doing this type of work, right? That we are proactively planning and figuring out how we can accommodate that growth that is inevitably going to happen in Atlanta. And from my perspective at the Atlanta Land Trust, I'm really concerned about this because as more and more people move to the city, what's happening is there's more demand for housing, and housing costs are going up, and it's putting a lot of pressure on long-time, low-income residents in the city, and it's pushing people out. And so what we're focused on at the Land Trust is making sure that we're creating and preserving housing for those people, but we can't do that work alone. And so it really needs to be a collaborative effort that recognizes the complexity of the issue, and that you have to think about not just land use and housing, but also transportation and how we can get people around more easily and accommodate density in places where we have already made those infrastructure investments or know that we'll be making those infrastructure investments in the future.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off of that, so I love this billboard, this notice, probably gone across social media as well, that's like, you know, you're in a car, right, stuck in traffic in Atlanta, but this billboard is like, you're the problem, right? So you're cursing out somebody and upset, but you're the one in the car contributing to that problem. And I mention that because I'm a long-term resident of Atlanta. I grew up about a mile from here in a public housing project in the 80s. And so I remember in Atlanta that only had 4 lanes on 75 and 85, had no traffic anywhere. And so as I see it today, a part of the issue is that we're a product of our own success. And in many ways, that's not detrimental, right? Like, isn't that what life is all about, is growth, is flourishing, is prospering. And that's what we've done, right? We created a city where more and more people want to live. The biggest issue, however, is that unlike the circa me of 1980 and Atlantans of 1980, we have to adjust our mindset of what it means to be in a city that now has been successful in attracting a lot of new people. And that means we can't make the same decisions today in 2024 that we were making in 1984. And I think that's the biggest thing that Urban Oasis Development is constantly working on, is really focusing on us as residents, as citizens, that we have ownership of this city, and that we need to make sure we're informed in a way that we're making today's decisions around transportation, transit, housing, and affordability and otherwise, and not making yesterday's or allowing biases that are really just myths to guide some of our practices. And that, to me, then bubbles up to elected officials. I know we like to throw stones at them, and I work on a lot of elected officials, but I continue to tell people, you're more powerful. I talk to too many elected officials who literally use you as the reason for why they're doing what they're doing as it relates to poor decision-making around transit. And so I want you to take away, hopefully after today, an empowerment to know you're both a part of the problem, but you're also part of the solution.
All right. Carrie?
Well said. I think traffic in Atlanta is relative to your own experiences in Atlanta, elsewhere. Like my panelists have said, we need to think about the infrastructure that we do have, the high capacity rail that we have, and the parking lots that you walk through to get from the train station to get to here. And we'll get more into that kind of development. But suffice to say that any city that has a lot going on will have traffic, and the goal, one of the goals has to be to put more options on your route between where you're coming from and where you're going, so you have the opportunity to make a shorter trip, that you don't have to be traveling 45 miles to get to the grocery store that you prefer, that you have options across the city where you can make choices to go to an event that is 2 miles away instead of 30 miles away.
Sierra, one more thing I want to add. I actually think that traffic is good in some ways. I want to just put that out there, because in Atlanta right now, it's too easy to drive. It's more time efficient, it's less expensive. The less comfortable and convenient it is to drive, the more you will see people choosing to utilize public transit instead. And so I do think in some ways traffic can be a good thing for our system as a whole.
Thank you for that. And just thinking about traffic, though, that is a positive, but there are also negatives associated with traffic. One of the things that ATO DOT, as John mentioned, has created a Vision Zero action plan earlier this year with a goal of eliminating traffic deaths by 2040. There are multiple layers required to address that goal. How do you or your group or organization play a role in getting Atlanta to zero fatalities and severe injuries?
I can start by just kind of sharing an anecdote. We're developing affordable housing projects across the city. Some of our projects are townhome communities. We actually have one that's right across the Beltline from here at the intersection of Peoples and Donnelly. And as part of that project, we are putting in on-street parking and sidewalks. So the effect of that will be on Donnelly in particular to slow down traffic. And that point, that is the only entrance to the Beltline for the Oakland City neighborhood. So it is an area where you could potentially have a lot of pedestrian traffic, but it's so high speed right now because it's 2 lane, it's actually a 3-lane road, and it's an east-west connector. And so when we were taking our project through the planning process and the permitting process, we did get pushback from some people because they like to be able to drive quickly along Donnelly. But our project will slow things down, so it does create a safer pedestrian environment, not just for the people who are living in our townhomes, but for the broader community, because that's a really important access point to the neighborhood.
Yeah, with urban oasis development, we really like to take the approach that a part of the issue is that I love this concept, right, of multi-mobility and having multiple options to get around. So what we're trying to do with our projects is always enable multiple access points and multiple ways in which to get around and move around your neighborhood without a car. Because first and foremost, fatalities are created by cars. Like point blank period, right? Nobody's creating that fatality by walking into each other. And largely not by biking, cycling into each other, right? It's like high-speed cars that are running into people, cyclists, etc. And so what we try to do is one, as Amanda mentioned, there are simple things like there's not a lot of actual sidewalks. So walking in Atlanta is very difficult and unsafe, point blank period. And so it's kind of hard to blame a car for running into somebody when like you have a whole stretch. I live right down the street from here on Murphy that has no sidewalk. We have a bike lane that actually ends. We have a sidewalk that actually ends, and then we have a MARTA stop right there. So this is counterproductive. So we're working on 2 projects locally that both adding sidewalks. We also, through those projects, try to really advocate with the city to create additional mechanisms. So there's a spur trail that's right now under design that will go from the main belt line, which we're on right now, and connect to Oakland City MARTA station. Once again, if you enable people to now have an opportunity to take transit and to get to that transit safely, which is what this spur trail will do, you now are reducing the possibility of them being hit by a car, suffering fatality. And then the last thing is that we're trying to enable those who don't want to have a vehicle, which means they won't even be a part of the problem in terms of car ownership, to have opportunities to have housing. So we're building 2 of the first car-free developments right now. Both of them are on the Beltline, not far from here. They're for sale housing, so they're going to allow for people to have home ownership. They're actually affordable housing as well. And this is, once again, when people say car-free, you're like, oh, Joe, that will never work in Atlanta. We ran data studies, and members of the team who were part of this was alongside. Every census tract around where we're at right now, there is no less than 25% of the people in that census tract that today do not own a car. There are census tracts around us, 50% plus of the people, half the people don't have a car. So you can't tell me just anecdotally that Atlantans only drive when you can't drive if you don't have a car. And so we try to enable, opportunities for people to have housing without necessarily having that vehicle.
I bring a little bit of a different perspective here as a sort of transportation professional that works at a national organization that cities like Atlanta are members of. And what we really focus on is sort of 3 strategies for achieving Vision Zero. And the first is reducing speeds. That can be in any number of ways. It can be reducing the speed limit. Even reducing the speed limit on a sign can reduce that high-end little sliver of speeders, and those are the most dangerous people on the streets. Installing speed humps, of course, but also the second prong is redesigning our streets so that the people using our streets are naturally driving a way that you design the street for. So whether that means adding friction along the side of the street, if that is a parking protected bike lane, whether that means changing the timing of the signals so that the progression of speeds is really reduced, whether that means daylighting intersections, so removing a little bit of parking so that when you're stepping out to cross the street, you can actually see what cars are coming, and those cars can see you. So, and then the third prong of the third strategy that I think is really important is partnerships. Partnerships across the city, across MARTA, across regional entities with developers, really making sure that whenever there's an opportunity for partnership, that those decisions can come together and work towards that, take every opportunity to make our streets safer. So making sure that we take those advantages to work together and make sure that when we're touching the street, we're making the best choices for that corner.
Thank you. So you all have really touched on that nexus between housing, transportation, and land use. How does the comprehensive development plan, specifically Atlanta's Plan A, inform your work or your projects? Does it have a role in the decision-making for your projects?
It definitely informs what we're doing at the Land Trust, because we when we are out looking at land that we're thinking about acquiring or developing, we're looking at the zoning and the underlying land use. And we are ideally acquiring property that allows for us to build at a higher density than strictly single family. And we're also really focused on being in places that, like you said, have access to opportunity, which means that they have transit access. Our geographic area of focus at the Atlanta Land Trust is the Beltline corridor. The Beltline planning area specifically is where we're trying to do most of our work, recognizing that in the future is going to be an amenity that will allow people to get around the city more easily. It's also an infrastructure investment that we are all making as citizens of Atlanta, and it's only fair that low and moderate income families continue to have access to that amenity as well. So we're really trying to be in close proximity to the Beltline and introduce context-sensitive density within that area, because it's someplace that we want to make sure that as many people as possible have access to, but it's also important for the viability of transit on the Beltline in the future. We have to be creating transit supportive density in order for that project to be viable as a transit project in the future.
So we're working on several projects, as I mentioned, not far from here. And one of those projects is actually on an 8-acre site, almost 9-acre site. It is directly across the street from an entrance to the Oakland City MARTA station. This is the impact of the CDP and land use. The land use designation that was agreed on back in 2018 made it such that when I was bringing that project for rezoning, and I said we wanted to do a high-density, transit-oriented development with, hundreds of units of housing, commercial retail opportunities that would be introduced to that area, right across the street from an entrance to the Oakland City MARTA station. I was literally turned down by our city staff because they pointed to the comprehensive development plan and said, no, everybody said they don't want this here. And they also said my project wasn't transit-oriented. This is how impactful the words on underneath the CDP Plan A is. And it gets to the point of, once again, we have a lot of empowerment, and what we put into this plan, it will be used by our own city, that we may say, hey, why is the city not doing this? Oh, because we said that that's what we didn't want, or we said that that's what they want. Now, because our neighborhood at the MPU level was willing to support our efforts, we still were able to rezone that and now have a transit-oriented development that's unfolding. But I just want everybody to know that's where the rubber meets the road, is that it's so important for you to be a part of this conversation. And the policies in this city are completely anti-housing, they're anti-affordability, they're anti-positive transportation. I just want you all to know the actual policies are all in paper, and they are anti the things that we're saying. We've got to get it right.
I think, so again, a little bit of a different perspective. I'm going to plug a resource that we have coming out in January, our NACDO Urban Bikeway Design Guide, which is built as a bikeway design guide, but it has a lot of material that applies across the board to planning and good planning practices. And two things in it that I think apply here. One is that it includes a section that says, that sort of highlights strategies for going beyond a bold vision. These bold visions are important, but in order to achieve bold visions, we have to do hard work. And so we need to build that into sort of the next steps from the CDP to the CTP to the actual action plans of what's going to happen. And we need to have leadership, bold leadership, to stand behind these visions that invest in the staff that need to have these happen, invest in the community engagement processes to have these bold visions come to light, and stand behind the visions to make sure that these tough decisions can be made. And then the other element that's I want to just add that's part of this is that a lot of work at this stage in Atlanta, I think, is project-based work where the city and communities have come together and solved a problem in a specific location. And now with the CDP, we're trying to go from the project level where every decision and every element of that decision is a real fight, to pull back and say, what parts of that can we institutionalize? What parts of that can we make into a standard? What parts of that can we put into the plan so that when we go to do this next, because we will be doing this again, how do we make it a little easier and how do we go a little further? So taking this like project-focused orientation and really moving to a programmatic citywide space where we can make cohesive decisions to make progress towards these bold visions.
Thank you. Amanda and Joel, you both brought up transit-oriented development. We are in a location that is connected to the Beltline, obviously is near a future infill station, the Oakland City MARTA station, which is about a mile south of here, is a future TOD site. And to the north, about 1 mile, is the future Mall West End development. Amanda, how can TOD be better planned and implemented in Atlanta? What are some of the challenges?
Well, I think the biggest thing is having the right zoning and land use in place. And when I was at MARTA, a big part of our work was to go through community planning processes to build support for a higher level of density, because a lot of the MARTA stations are situated in single-family communities. And people are uncomfortable with any level of development that introduces density beyond that. I remember we were working at the East Lake station, and the neighbors around that station, if we were going to develop those parking lots, they wanted us to develop them into single-family homes because that's what was there originally. And that is what a lot of people believe. And so, again, like Joel said, your input is incredibly important because we need to build support for, again, more moderate, gentle, context-sensitive density, whatever you want to call it. Because without that community support, it's really difficult to get the appropriate zoning and land use in place in order to create the density that you want to have at a station. And from MARTA's perspective, you need TOD in order to generate more ridership, to generate revenue, to support operations, and then more broadly, just make the station have more utility and to be more accessible. But also from the MARTA perspective, the biggest challenge is all of the infrastructure that's at the station that then has to be incorporated into the TOD project. And that includes, to some extent, replacement parking. That's just the reality. But it may also include replacing bus bays, sidewalk infrastructure, other components of the infrastructure at the station, and that is expensive. And so there has to be some sort of public funding support available to replace all of that infrastructure and incorporate it into the TOD project because the developer is unable to bear that cost on their own.
And we were just joined by Ms. Shelley Peart. She is the Assistant General Manager for Planning at MARTA, and you are right on time, ma'am. I just asked Amanda a question about transit-oriented development, and just wondering if you want to chime in any on how TOD can be better planned and implemented in Atlanta. How can transit-oriented development be better planned and implemented in Atlanta? Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Shelley Peart, and I do apologize. I see some friendly faces. Great, so good. Stuck in traffic. It's not MARTA. I was not on MARTA, and that's probably the reason why I got stuck in traffic. Okay. How can it be better implemented in Atlanta?
Planned and implemented.
I think Atlanta is already, and I'm a little bit biased because I used to work for the city of Atlanta, and I've been here doing this CDP process before. So I know what they're doing in terms of pushing mixed-use development and, making sure that we have those things around transit corridors. I think what's going to be new for us is that we have our rail stations where we're trying to implement TOD, but now we have a new mode, bus rapid transit BRT, so we have now new BRT corridors. So I would say that if you can continue to develop these corridors, looking for more opportunities for redevelopment along a lot of these corridors, that would be, thank you. That would be a really good way to keep that moving. I hope that's the question.
Thank you. Carrie and Joel, looking beyond the parcel for transit-oriented development to the corridors and neighborhoods, how can we develop transit-oriented communities that create an environment for safe and accessible multimodal transportation?
Yeah, great question. So let me ask everybody, who is familiar with the Atlanta City Design Plan? Okay, so for those who didn't, this is your homework. The Atlanta City Design was a master citywide plan, first of its kind put together for Atlanta. This was done way back 2017, I want to say. It was actually put into the charter of Atlanta. The unfortunate thing is that so many Atlantans have no idea this thing exists, and the city hasn't necessarily been following it. And so I mention that because if you read that plan, it has all of the right check marks for how we can better enable transit-oriented development within the context of lower density neighborhoods, single-family neighborhoods, et cetera. They did massive amount of planning and study across multiple neighborhoods that included residents in that process, and it's a travesty that we don't just read and do what we already came to the conclusion is what we need to do. And so I don't want to add to that other than to say that's my answer. Go read the Atlanta City Design Plan before you give your full input on all of the Plan A. Just read it, see if it doesn't inform you a bit more, and then hopefully reinforce that, because that plan would enable transit-oriented development in neighborhoods like I live in, historic Adair Park, which is also a historic neighborhood, low density, but also allow for us to build right next to the MARTA station, which is right there, gentle density that will enable more people like us, that will enable more diversity of housing, which means diversity of incomes and affordability, and will not, and I once again repeat, we not destroy the neighborhoods that we keep saying we're concerned about destroying.
So those things aren't free. Can you do a fact check for us? So as a developer, you may support zero or limited parking, transit-oriented development, and a proposed development, but your lenders or bankers may expect parking minimums or insist on it. How true is that?
Very true. Did you have a comment, though, on that last question? Okay. Conceptually, for those who don't know, just laying the framework. So there's this idea that, okay, let's say that we wanted to, or in the case of urban oasis development, we want to build housing that maybe doesn't have as much parking. So not a big parking deck, not a whole surface parking lot that's taking up a whole bunch of land. Well, on the Beltline, right, it's already enabled through the overlay that we can now build without the same amount of parking. So then it becomes, okay, great. So legally we can do it, but now we have to go get funding in order to build what we're legally able to do. And what has happened through the years is that your lenders, banks, for example, investors, are like, what? Car free? There's no parking? That's not going to work in Atlanta. There's no way I'm giving you money. And so this is the disconnect in this question. And so what we've been working on through the last really 3 to 4 years is that you just have to continue to socialize it, and you have to just have examples of getting it done. So while one of our first projects, and we're partnering with a group called Cul-de-sac, we have the Murphy Crossing site right now that we're unfolding. It's a 20-acre site. Cul-de-sac is an organization that was started in Tempe, Arizona. They're launching and have launched the first complete ground-up car-free development in this country across 17 acres. They now have several hundred units rented out, so people who move specifically to 100-degree heat in Tempe, just so that they wouldn't have to own a car. So you need to continue to have examples like that closer to here in the Southeast. Charlotte now has a couple examples of this. And so that's what we're having to do, is just continue to, one, build examples here, refer to examples that are around us, and say there is a whole market that's already looking to be this way. And for everybody who says, well, Joe, I haven't seen it, I point to the transformative Beltline and I say, you know how many people raised their hand and said that they were walking from wherever they were at to Ponce City Market area back in the day, like in the early 2000s? There wasn't nobody raising their hand saying, oh yeah, I'd make that walk every day. It wasn't until we unlocked the opportunity for people to make that walk safely that all of a sudden millions of people started doing it. And so that's what we continue to say, is that we have to use other examples where maybe it didn't look like it was there, but yes, in this case, if you build it, they're already here to take advantage of it. It is a real challenge, but it's not one that's insurmountable.
The other thing I would add is I think we need to push unbundling more, and that's the idea of you go rent an apartment, you don't automatically have a parking space that comes with your apartment. You get maybe a menu of options for transportation. One of those options could be renting a parking space, but another option might be your monthly transit pass, or a subscription, a monthly Uber subscription, or a scooter subscription, so that the cost around that parking space is more transparent. Because that's the problem right now. We just build it with every single project and we roll it into the cost of the project, and everything becomes more expensive because of that. But we don't give people the opportunity to make an informed decision that lays out all of the costs of the options that exist. So I would love to see more of that. There are examples of that in Atlanta, but I would love to see us push for more of that when we have developers come before us within our community meetings and MPU meetings. Let's unbundle the parking and provide more transparency around transportation and what those costs are.
And that cost, just so you all know, because I didn't know this stuff until I was real world doing development. If you live in a multifamily apartment complex here in Atlanta, the cost of the parking spot that you use was between $50,000 and $75,000. Just that little spot. Times however many number of people, right? 200 units, 300 units. This is why it's not an insignificant issue as it relates to what Amanda was just saying, is that you just are paying just to get in the door $75,000, and we haven't even started building the actual housing, right? The rooms and things like that. And so it is something that decoupling is so important, but more so decoupling in a way so that people realize, hey, if you do want it, trust me, that $100 that you're paying per month for that parking spot is nowhere close to covering the cost of what that costs, plus the cost of the interest, right? Because the bank isn't giving you that money for free. And so as more and more people have to pay and realize the real cost of that, then that becomes more relevant to your making a decision on, do I really need a car? I don't know.
Carrie, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think we're a little lost on the question, I think, but I think that the most critical piece of someone's choice of how they're going to get somewhere is how easy it is going to be to park on either end of that trip. I think it's not really about travel time. I think it's not really about the traffic. I think it's not really about the experience. I think a lot of the decision comes down to how easy it is going to be to park. And so in order to actualize these visions, that is going to have to get harder. And it doesn't need to get that hard for it to be much harder. In Atlanta, I'm a recent car owner, and so I'm recently learning how to drive and park in Atlanta. And I'm always thinking, oh my gosh, everyone says it's so hard to park there. I'm gonna have to spend a while to figure out how to park there. And it's almost always right there around the corner, a 2-minute walk. I'm used to figuring out all of this without a car, and that is so much more challenging. And so in order to bring those decisions and those trip plannings together, it is going to have to be harder to mostly park. I think driving, yes, traffic, yes, but I think the parking is the real final pressure point that is going to make people think differently about how they're going to get somewhere.
All right, so we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience, and yeah, we'll take this question, and then we'll take a couple questions live. So this one is from, is it okay if I say the name? Is from Jeremy. How does the city and MARTA partner together to plan and expand railways? That's it, question mark.
How do we partner? Mm-hmm. Well, we're partnered for the last 40-odd years. That's the first thing, because they're part of MARTA. There are 4 jurisdictions within MARTA: City of Atlanta, Fulton, Clayton, and DeKalb County. On a more specific level, everybody knows that the referendum that was passed in 2016 and adopted by MARTA in 2019, there's a list of expansion projects that we're actually implementing right now, developing and implementing. So that partnership exists. We meet regularly. I'm not sure if we need to go into any specific projects, no, but we look at that list, but then what we're also trying to do on the MARTA side is develop a system-wide plan, and that's something new for us, and that's just something that we're kicking off this year. And I'm going to kind of answer and by building in another question that you all talked about way before I got here, but I just want to try and pull it together. The CDP plan that's being discussed and built out right now, how that correlates with what we're doing in developing a system plan ourselves is that we're going to be partners by looking at the guidelines and the things that you create from your transportation element of the CDP and somehow try to get that rolled into the priorities of not only the City of Atlanta, but the priorities of the entire system. Because it's all good and well for us to sit here and talk about like what we can do for the City of Atlanta, but if we're only going to build something that's like 5 or 6 miles and it's in one section and then another section of town, whether it's in the City of Atlanta or in Decatur, isn't going to benefit from it, the system won't work. And then we're going to have a fragmented system that, there goes the partnership. So our partnership is not only between MARTA and City of Atlanta, but it's MARTA, the City of Atlanta, and the other 3 jurisdictions, and bringing us all together so that when we plan a project, it's not just going to benefit the City of Atlanta. Yes, your funds, your local matches and all of that do exist, and it goes towards those specific projects, but what we're looking for in the future is something that is going to make the system really work for everybody. Because if you want to get to someplace in Clayton or if you want to get to someplace in DeKalb, you're going to rely on us to do that. And if I'm only building something that only going to benefit you for this one area, it's not going to be supportive or sustainable. So we intend to build a system out, continuing the partnership, continuing the conversation that we're having, learning from and looking to see what comes out of the CDP, the transportation elements, to implement that ourselves into our system plan and just continue bringing the projects all together, hopefully.
Thank you. Someone's actually raising their hand. Yeah. The lady up there in the maroon turtleneck had her hand up first. Will you share your name, please, and what part of the city you reside in? The mic's not on.
Hi, my name is Susanna, and I live on the west side on Moores Mill on Margaret Mitchell. And a comment about MARTA is absolutely agreeable that we need to build it where it's useful. And if you look at Emory, which is our largest employer, and there's no MARTA access there. But my question actually revolves about kind of on what you said about accountability for our neighboring cities. A lot of the traffic we have is people coming in from neighboring towns and counties, specifically like Cobb County, who is resistant to any kind of MARTA transportation. So how do we hold these neighboring counties accountable for the cost that we're having to pay for the infrastructure to get them in the city?
And I guess to bring it around to the CDP, and John, this may be a question for you, is can that actually be addressed through the CDP in any way?
I don't know specifically about can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know about if there's an opportunity in the CDP, but I welcome kind of like groupthink on that. I think certainly in the CTP that's an opportunity, and I think it goes to the point that was made earlier, just about the extent to which or the ways in which we are subsidizing car trips, right? And I think when we have areas adjacent to the Beltline that are extremely desirable for people to come and want to park at, that are not metered, where there's free street parking, where there's free parking that is a part of the development, that's one of the many ways that we are incentivizing or subsidizing car trips. So I think there have been legislative efforts to look at from the city perspective, how we, make sure that the driver or the car owner is paying the full cost of that trip, and that's the cost and wear and tear on City of Atlanta streets. That's cost to everybody else kind of experiencing traffic. I know that there have been legislative efforts for that in the past that have I think, mostly been unsuccessful. But I think certainly when it comes to parking and the cost of parking, that's one of the levers that we control on the city side. But we only control 2,600 metered parking spaces, right? The vast majority of parking in the city of Atlanta is on the development and provided from the development or on the parcels themselves.
I will just say that, this gets back to a regional approach, right? And this is what ARC, the Atlanta Regional Commission, was designed for, is to say, hey, it's not just about Atlanta, or it's not just about Cobb. Like, all of us are intricately connected to each other. And so ARC does do a lot of research, a lot of studies, but that's one of the things. But we also can't not hold the state accountable, because the state has been absentee in this conversation that would actually better enforce things like Cobb, Gwinnett, and the connectedness transit-wise. And if you don't believe that, the first time the state ever gave money to MARTA was because Microsoft decided that they were going to build their second headquarters in Bankhead area, Grove Park, and the state saw that as an economic development engine, right? And they, for the first time ever, gave some money. Just that leadership, right, needs to continue both monetarily but also policy-wise, because this is still a state that can go down into these counties throughout an ARC area and say, hey guys, this is what you need to start doing, and incentivize it through funding mechanisms. So that's some of my thoughts.
Just a small addition is I think all of these projects cost money, and all of these projects cost money to do them better and to do more. I think it's a little bit of a red herring to care so much about where that dollar is coming from and whose street is it, and do you live in the county, and do you not live in the county. I think we need to create a city that has strong infrastructure that people can come to, that people will visit. The population of Atlanta will grow during the daytime, and that's not bad. So we need to, there are tools to extract funding in a lot of different ways. You can, New York has recently reauthorized their congestion pricing strategy for less money than they wanted to initially, but that doesn't really matter. That's a little bit immaterial. But what the strategy is that to create a zone where it should be more difficult to drive, and it should be something that you can do, and you can create that as a tool to fund transit and to improve transit access to that same area.
Can I add just one small thing, and exactly what Carrie's saying? We don't want to discourage anybody from coming into the city of Atlanta, because we also go to Gwinnett, and we go to the Cab, and we go to Cobb. And every time that somebody comes into the city of Atlanta, it's true, we do. We do. The Braves. Nobody watches the Braves?
The city of Atlanta bubble is real.
Okay.
I did when it was at Turner Field.
I go, I'm sorry, I'm a Braves fan.
I could walk there.
I don't care. I like it. But no, what I'm saying is just to remember that a part of the, I guess I'm going all the way back to the original penny, or the money that funds transit, comes from people spending money in the city of Atlanta, or wherever they're spending money, in DeKalb or Clayton or Fulton County. So we do want people to come in, whether it's for something at the Fox, or we want them to come in because they're spending their dollars. That's all I wanted to say, because it actually does help fund transit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so we have a question from Eric about what do we do to push design further? And I'll kind of provide some context to that. So Carrie was talking about the importance of infrastructure. So we need to consider what the next phase of our bike network is, the roles of trails planning, transit expansion, even the sidewalk network. which, by the way, I don't think is mentioned in either the land use chapter or the transportation chapter of the CDP. So how should the city be thinking about addressing that challenge, and how do we prioritize modes on different corridors in the city?
Can I jump in? Okay. How does the city prioritize modes? I would just like the city to prioritize modes. I'm not sure how you do it, but I'd like the city to say that, okay, transit is a priority for the city. That's the first thing. Second thing is in terms of sidewalks. If you have a transit corridor, then you have to have a sidewalk infrastructure built out as well, because there's so many places right now where you see the goat paths, and it's really ridiculous in a city this size. We're exactly where we are and what we're trying to do, where we don't have sidewalk infrastructure. I know when I worked at the city, we started this, and everybody, I think in the last 20 years that's worked at the city, Albert Rush, has started or tried to build some kind of sidewalk infrastructure program that we can fund. And that's a big thing. We can't seem to fund it. We work with developers to make sure that they, wherever they're developing, implements 8 foot, is it 8 now or 6? I'm not sure what the minimum is anymore. Depends on where you are exactly. So for me, prioritize transit, prioritize or actually build out, or at least have a program where we can say that we're starting to build out the sidewalk infrastructure, because it goes hand in hand. Nobody even gets into a car without walking first at some point, right? So to get to transit, we need better sidewalks. We need sidewalks, period. Some, even in the worst state that they are, is better than nothing. But then, you have to make sure that they're ADA compliant and all that kind of good stuff. I think there was one other piece I wanted to add in terms of prioritizing. I think as we develop the CDP and we really look at the projects that we're always saying that we want to have, I want to say this really nicely. Let's be realistic. Let's truly be realistic. Let's not, I like to have good dreams and pipe dreams and high dreams, and we want to, look at the things that our neighbors have and say, we want this, we want that. But we need to be realistic with the dollars that we have. We need to be realistic with the space that we have. And I think instead of having these very long lists of projects that sometimes never get built, they go nowhere, let's think about what our priorities are. If it's to move people around safely, more efficiently, I would ask you to pay attention to the work that we're doing for the bus network redesign project right now. That is refocusing our corridors along higher density areas, along areas where you can maybe walk a 10-minute walk to get to a bus stop. And we're also trying, even though it's not in our realm to build sidewalks, it's not our goal, right? It's not our purview, thank you. But we do build where we can, especially if it's just connecting you from an intersection to the bus stop. But we want to work with cities, we want to work with our counties in building out these infrastructures so that we can have safer routes to our transit. That's primary for us. And so with the CDP as it's developed, as you build on, as you think about where you want to build transit, where you want to see transit, where you want to be able to get around, be realistic in thoughts about what we can afford, what we can do. And I think if instead of just creating all of these lists that I know we have to do, let's just think of, okay, when you're going shopping for Christmas now and you realize that, okay, I have $100, but I have 10 people to buy for, don't you think more pragmatically? You're like, okay, what can I really afford? And so you want to end up getting all the 10 people a gift or something, but you think logically about it. You figure out, how can I afford this? That's the kind of thinking that I'm hoping that people will do as we build out the transportation element of the CDP, because otherwise we're just going to end up with yet another document that sits there for another 3 or 4 years, and we have to update it again. And if we can think about building out the system to where the buses are right now, where their density is, I think we can actually get some funding. I'm being long-winded, I'm sorry. I think I had 1.5 minutes.
And I just wanted to add to that to just say, like, to that question, I think if we re-emphasize people building the city, right, designing the city for people, for us, and not for vehicles and not for cars, that will lead to better outcomes. But also, I think if we better connect things like trails and sidewalks and cycling pathways and transit to real economic development return, which I do not think is happening. They're not using data to show this can produce real dollars and cents, real economic development. Once again, that's the reason why the state gave money to Microsoft, not because they wanted to support transit, because they knew that that was going to produce an economic outcome that they wanted to see happen. We're not doing that with trails. The Beltline itself has produced a 10-to-1 return on investment, a tremendous amount of economic return. We can debate who that has gone to and how equitably, but it has done that in and of itself. But we have not actually fully amplified even that investment, because while we built a trail and we built parks, we have yet to build a single foot or mile of transit, which is the very thing that was originally going to unlock the value in the first place. And that is purely because it has not been connected directly to economic development, in addition to some other reasons, right? But we need to start really making the case that these paths and trails and things are not just nice to haves that are cool. I know we all want them for that reason, but I know when it comes to city planning and budgets and all of this, they need to make economic development decisions. I just don't think that they're doing that, and they're saying this is why it's so difficult to get a new trail built. We had to fight like crazy to get a 1.5 mile spur trail from the main Beltline to the Oakland City MARTA station. We're like, why? Like $1 million, like a mile, and it was going to cost like $3 million. But because they're looking at every penny and trying to decide, does it really make sense? Why don't we just pave, all of Lee Street again, right? Because that's going to cost a lot of money. And so I'll pause there, but that would be my input to Eric's question.
Carrie, do you have anything to add to that?
No.
Well, Shelley mentioned something about being pragmatic and thinking through how we make sure that the CDP can actually be implementable. And so that is my question to you all. What is the future of transportation in Atlanta? What's on the horizon or the landscape that we need to be looking out for in order to ensure that our comprehensive development plan is actionable and can be fully implemented? Final thought. Final thoughts.
I think one of the most important things is just making sure that we're connecting transit decisions to land use decisions, and that we are concentrating all of our density in places where we have already made massive infrastructure investments, so that we can leverage those investments and, again, make additional investments. But we have invested a lot of money in our transportation system as it exists today, and we are not getting enough out of it. And the only way that we're going to be able to get more out of it is if we encourage more development in close proximity so that riding that system is more convenient. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure that we're connecting those two decisions around land use and transportation.
Yes, and so from the transportation perspective, we need to create more and more of opportunities like that. We need to look at the Beltline and think, we talk a lot about the Beltline, but I think a thought experiment that I like to do with myself and anyone that will listen, so a room here, is imagine the Beltline as a corridor, and the destinations, even older destinations, and imagine it as a road. Imagine it as a 4-lane, 5-lane, 6-lane road. It would be so convenient. It would be pretty crowded. It would be pretty congested. And we would never be able to take that road away and put in a trail. Emotionally, psychologically, that would be so difficult. It was difficult turning a unused rail corridor into a beautiful trail. It would have been so much harder to take away tens of thousands of vehicle trips a day on that. But that's what we need to, that's how we need to think about our streets. It's harder to give up money than it is to decline money. psychologically, and that's kind of the place we're at. We need to really think about what our streets are and restart that question and restart, like, what does Hollowell look like? What does it look like as a corridor, and what do we want it to achieve? We don't need the breweries there. We don't need the Pond City Market redeveloped already.
And I know we're at time, so I was just gonna say, as you're looking at the CDP and transportation, think of it like this. You will never eliminate something by incentivizing it. So anytime you're trying to figure out how do we reduce traffic, you will never ever reduce traffic by incentivizing more cars by adding a lane. The only way you can adjust the traffic by one mode is to open up a new mode, a different mode, so that somebody may use that same access point, but use a different mode or mobility option. This is the only way, everybody. So as you're thinking about this from a transit perspective, very little should include cars, because that will never get rid of the traffic. Trust me, we've been building, I told you, I lived in Atlanta with 4 lanes on 75, 85, and we still haven't eliminated traffic. We've only added to it. The same thing is the case on our streets and roadways as well. So just keep that in mind. Even if you don't want to or walk, I tell people every day, I'm building car-free developments to help those who actually are in cars, because the more people I get on a different mobility option, it's gonna open up the lanes for everybody who loves cars, and you're all gonna just like speed through. And so that's what I'll contribute as you look at the CDP.
Shelley, any final thoughts?
I guess my final thought would be to plug the bus network redesign project that we're implementing right now. We have our very next public meeting. It's a virtual one tomorrow at, oh God, Ryan's gonna kill me, 12 o'clock. It's virtual, come on in. We had some great discussions at our last one last week, Thursday. I think one of the big things from this is that it took almost 3 years, and it took almost 3 years for us to kind of come out with this, because we wanted to make sure that we addressed it from an equitable standpoint. We came up with the results, and then we said, you know what, there's some areas here that they're really gonna be hit hard. So we went back again, and so we were kind of a little late coming out with this, but when you see it, and when you realize that we're going to be able to, with local, now, keep in mind, we are looking at high-capacity other modes that we're bringing to Atlanta right now, bus rapid, BRT, and ART services. But with the local services that we have right now, just by us redesigning, we're going to give you anywhere from 10, but we can promise more of a 15-minute headway, every day, all day. This is not peak. This is every day on these routes. You'll be able to get out there and know that in 15 minutes, my bus is going to be here, and I can get to where I need to be. And when you see the numbers of all of the places that we're going to be offering this service, it's remarkable. Now, I want to let everybody know that, yes, there are going to be some areas where you're not going to have the 15-minute service. You may have 20, you may have 30, some people may have an hour. And then there'll be areas where you're not going to see that great access. And in those areas where we call them the on-demand zones, we're going to have another concept that we're bringing into the fold, where you will call for a service. This is kind of like our project that we did last year. Now I'm forgetting the REACH program. Thank you. I don't know who said it, but thank you. So we're implementing that as well. Pay attention to the bus network. Pay attention to the high capacity that we're bringing along Summerhill. Our next one will be on Campbellton. In the end, we're going to have a connected system, folks. We're going to have BRT all over. One of the things I want to commend the city on is about 2 years ago, went ahead and implemented bus-only lanes policy. This is great, because what that does is, for the buses that can ride in a lane, as we said, we're taking lanes, which is good, it's going to make sure that the trip is more reliable. So there are a lot of things that MARTA is working with the city on. We're partnering to make sure that we can bring you different modes. But I think one of the most important, and it's not related right to heavy rail, but rail is also important for us, is our buses. We're going to improve the service to the point where every 15 minutes you can get someplace where you've never been before. We focused on making sure that you could get to grocery stores, health facilities, to work, to recreational places. I think if you look and see what MARTA is really leaning in and trying to do with all of our jurisdictional partners, you'll see that we're trying to put you first, people first. making sure that we can provide that safe, reliable transit. So more to come. Thank you.
So before I pass it off to Nate, first want to say thank you to our panelists, Carrie, Joel, Amanda, and Shelley. Thank you all so much. Joel opened up and talked about empowerment. Carrie recently just mentioned something about the Beltline already being successful. Both Amanda and Shelley have talked about accessibility, and I want to share a personal story just to kind of tie that all together. Very anecdotal, but just wanted to share this. So I live in Capitol View, which is not too far from here in Southwest Atlanta. At the time, the CEO of the Beltline used to have a coffee and conversation where he would meet with residents to find out what their needs were. He was at the community grounds in South Atlanta. One person showed up, my neighbor, and our neighborhood had been talking about the fact that we didn't have access to the Beltline yet. It was still kudzu and overgrowth, but we wanted access even if it wasn't a paved trail. So she went to that coffee and conversation with the CEO of the Beltline and said, not the current one, and said, you need to clear the path for Southwest residents to be able to access the Beltline, even if it's not paved, because we deserve to have access to, we deserve to be able to use it too, and we're willing to use it until it's paved because we've been waiting for it, we've been here for it. So he committed to getting that done. He cleared the path. One person's comment, but he knew that she was representing a whole community. Fast forward, the path is cleared. I personally used to walk from Capitol View to Reynoldstown to work, and so that replaced my car drive trip with a walking trip because that trail was cleared. So just to show you that, one, empowerment, provide feedback, speak up. Two, that my story is probably not the only story of someone similar throughout the city who needs access to transportation and mobility and different modes of transportation, that they would do it if they could. That was very important for me because I'm a scaredy cat and I don't ride bikes on the streets. I'm sorry. Blessings to all of you that do. And then three, just access to opportunity. Think about those that could potentially reach a new job, a new school, a new doctor if they had more access. So just want to focus on that and really ask you all to give as much feedback as you can on this comprehensive development plan. Look out for the comprehensive transportation plan coming next spring. Thank you.